I am Michael French.
I am Melinda Mock.
And we are the RetroBlasting YouTube channel. Thank you for having us here.
Thanks, you guys.
And we are here to talk about the real American hero. Specifically, G.I. Joe. Neon is half the battle. What we're talking about today is everything that happened in 1987 and beyond. It is a pivotal year for this toy line, and we felt like we wanted to deep dive into it, really dig into it, because G.I. Joe is a broad topic. So we're gonna show you a little pie slice of G.I. Joe. It was relaunched in 1982 from the original 60s Hasbro toy line. It was rebranded A Real American Hero, and it was shrunk down to 3 3/4 inches tall, probably because of the success of Star Wars, and also because Takara had a great design with the Microman series. So they used that construction. And it drew a lot of inspiration from real-world military, just like the original line had done. However, this time it mixed reality with a little bit of fantasy. G.I. Joe was no longer fighting the Germans or fighting a foreign enemy. They were fighting Cobra, a worldwide terrorist organization. But they still had one foot in reality. So for example, the Sky Striker was based on the F-14 Tomcat. You had the Mobat tank, which was based on a real military tank. Similarly, you had the Dragonfly, which was based on a real Bell AH-1 Cobra helicopter from Vietnam. You also had the Whale hovercraft, which was based on a real military hovercraft, which is kind of a cool idea. Obviously, the G.I. Joe vehicles incorporated some fantasy elements and some other things to accommodate play value. But otherwise, they were credible looking toys if you're talking about a military perspective. In 1984, the uniforms started to get a little more individualistic. They weren't the 13 olive drab looking guys you saw in the first photograph. But for every Spirit, there was a Duke, and for every Storm Shadow, there was a Recondo. So there was still a balance of realistic military guys next to some of the more outlandish looking characters. But they were still, in my estimation, understated compared to what was to come. 1985 is really the seminal year for G.I. Joe, Real American Hero. If you are in doubt about that, you have no farther to look than the release of the USS Flag aircraft carrier, which was based off the Nimitz class. This toy was infamous in the 1980s to anybody who had parents, because when you showed that to them from the Sears catalog, they were like, "You're out of your mind." It was over $100. It was 7.5 feet long, and even if your parents could afford it, very few people in the 1980s had a home with a room where they could set it up. So sometimes just by default, you couldn't acquire it. This was also the year that saw the release of the episodic cartoon having the characters we all remember. The cartoon really capitalized on characters like the second version of Snake Eyes with Timber the Wolf, and Shipwreck, and Quick Kick, and Barbecue, and Dusty, the Crimson Twins, Flint and Lady J, and of course Bazooka and Alpine. It's funny to note that in '84 we had Blowtorch starting fires. In '85 we had Barbecue putting them out. So these two G.I. Joes add up to 0. They're a non-figure together. You also had, in '85, you had the Snowcat, and you had the Awestriker, and you had the Moray. Like, these were great vehicles. They were great toys to play with. Now, the Snowcat isn't exactly realistic. It's starting to push the boundaries of fantasy, but it's still based on that half-track model. The Awestriker is based on a real vehicle, the Fast Attack vehicle, which is used by the military in desert conditions. And then you had the Cobra Hydrofoil, which most of the Cobra equipment was fantasy, minus the Rattler, which was based on the A-10 Warthog. You also got Sergeant Slaughter as a mail-in. Now you might think, okay, whether you're a fan of Sergeant Slaughter or not, G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, already had Cobra. It already had, Destro. It had these characters. At least Sergeant Slaughter, while being a wrestler, was actually a military-themed wrestler. So it wasn't too much of a jump. But Hasbro goes into 1986 really riding high, because when you look at the Flag retailing for $110, right? Hasbro was, they were like on a sugar rush where they were like, we can sell anything and they'll buy it, right?
And that's 1980s money.
Yeah, that's 1980s money. I just want you to note the photo of the Flag. This is from a toy catalog in '85. The kids are playing with everything but the Flag.
Yeah, the flag
just
is like a
pointing
big
that out.
table.
Yeah,
Where you
it's-
can store your planes and your.
Yeah, it's like a kid's fantasy coffee table. So we go into 1986. This is actually a photo from a buying spree in 1986. We go into 1986, which by some accounts was G.I. Joe Real American Hero's most successful year, because they rode off the immense popularity of 85, so everybody was charged for G.I. Joe. It's kind of like how in Kenner, when they did Star Wars, they rolled off the original film, and then when Empire landed, the toy line just blew up. You know, people just were enamored with it. But
It's a big butt, y'all.
there is a hype factor here, because I believe that 86 was successful because 85 was awesome. Because in 86 we got Serpentor, we got Dr. Mindbender, and we got Roadblock now wearing a neon colored vest, which I could never, and so I feel like this is more of like a, pardon the expression, I feel this is more like a Phantom Menace situation, where everybody was riding high from the previous films, and in this case the previous year, the previous season, and so Hasbro introduced all these other guys, and people were like, G.I. Joe, G.I. Joe, G.I. Joe. But when you look back on it, you start to see the cracks forming in the foundation. Things are starting to fall apart, and there's no better example of this than Sci-Fi. So people think that Sci-Fi looks like RoboCop. In actuality, RoboCop looks like Sci-Fi, because Sci-Fi came out in 1986, which means he was being designed at Hasbro sometime in 1985. RoboCop didn't come out till 1987. And Sci-Fi also introduces the neon element into G.I. Joe big time. Now, I know Flash and some of the other guys had some, orange pads and things like that, but Sci-Fi is a true glow stick character. And what I'm bringing that up for is to say that you talk to some G.I. Joe collectors, and we get bombarded by them a lot, and they told us before we did this panel that if we didn't attribute what we were talking about to Ninja Turtles, they said that we'd be spreading false information. Now I'm about to
It's
throw
a
the monkey
strong
wrench in.
allegation.
I'm about to throw the monkey wrench in the machine. 1986. Ninja Turtles didn't come out till late 87, early 88. They were not a factor in this decision. Sci-Fi is the smoking gun of the beginning of the end of G.I.
That's
Joe.
right. That's right, Internet. We said it. We said it here in front of all these people. Bring it on.
But Hasbro hadn't completely jumped the SHARC yet. SHARC with a C. They still had militaristic characters like Beachhead and Leatherneck, and even guys like Iceberg and Lowlight and Hawk looked pretty decent. Dial Tone and Mainframe and Wetsuit started to get a little fantasy, but they still had a purpose within the military team. They were the communications guy, they were the diver, and the computer expert. Lifeline and Sci-Fi started to get a little garish. And Lifeline has a funny little footnote. On his card back there, he's carrying a really nice 1911 semi-automatic, but in the cartoon, he was an ardent pacifist who actively attempted to undermine some of G.I. Joe's missions because he didn't like violence. So there was this real problem. It was like, well, my character comes with the gun, but the cartoon says he doesn't like guns, so whoops. And you still had some great vehicles in this lineup. You had the Tomahawk, which was based off the Chinook, and you even had this Conquest X-30, which was based off a real experimental Grumman fighter plane. It never saw the light of day as far as mass production, but it was a real jet that flew around in the 80s for NASA and the U.S. Air Force as they did aerial experiments. You also had the Cobra Night Raven, which was based off the SR-71. Now, some people argue that the Night Raven is based off the Clint Eastwood Firefox jet.
These are those same Internet people from before.
I know that there are certain features on the front of it that do, but you've got the drone on the back, which only the SR-71's variant had. You've got the surface detailing, which is identical to the SR-71 stealth skin. And you've got just the general proportions of the landing gears, the engine placement, and the rear fins. My vote is for the SR-71 being for the Night Raven, and the Firefox can go spit. So, you also got the fridge. The fridge is 1987. This is where we wanted to kick you into 1987 and really start talking to you about this. Okay,
Kick,
so we
pun intended.
yeah, so
Huh.
we've seen 1986. We've seen some good vehicles. We've seen some good stuff. The fridge was a mail-away character, and he comes with a. It's almost like they didn't even get him out of his football uniform for this action figure, and he comes with a football-shaped mace. So he's literally trying. He's a jock trying to bludgeon you over the head with sports. Like, and for a kid like me, I was like, I have no interest in this figure at all. We wanted to show you a little clip.
He's getting mad. He's getting heat. He's breaking the line for the G.I. Joe team.
That's right, it's William the Refrigerator Perry.
The fridge is joined G.I. Joe.
And you can get a free fridge. Here's how.
Collect 5 fridge certificates or call the number on the certificate and the fridge will tell you how to get in on the action with only 4 certificates. There's a $1 handling charge. See details on specially marked G.I. Joe packages.
Watch out, Cobra. Fridge is coming through.
Yo, Joe.
Your mom gets the phone bill, and she's like, "Little Johnny, have you been calling the fridge again?"
It was a very successful mail-away character, much like Sergeant Slaughter. All my friends had Sergeant Slaughter in the fridge, and some of the other characters that G.I. Joe offered around that time, including Steel Brigade. Steel Brigade, if you don't know who that was a mail-away figure where you got to write out your own code name on the file card, and then you sent it into Hasbro, and they sent you a generic figure, but he came with a printout file card that had your information and write-up on it, so you had your own Joe, so you could be part of the battle, which was kind of cool. 1987 really starts pushing the fantasy element of G.I. Joe. We have the Havoc and we have the Stun being the 2 main vehicles for G.I. Joe and Cobra. And as you can see, these don't look like anything we've ever seen on Earth. Like, they're starting to really look like, you know, lunar rovers from, you know, Space 1999 or something like that. To show you just how much G.I. Joe changed in 4 years, we thought we'd do this by walking you through the villains lineup from 83 to 87. So we're gonna start with 83. You have Cobra Commander, good choice. You have Destro and Major Blood, his 2 second-in-command cohorts, and then you've got the Cobra Officer and the Cobra Infantryman, which you can buy in large numbers if your parents spoiled you. And then you could have a little army, right? Then in 1984, we get a really awesome lineup of figures. We get the hooded Cobra Commander, we get Baroness, we get Zartan, we get Copperhead, we get Scrap Iron, we get Wild Weasel, we get Firefly, we get Storm Shadow, okay? So that I don't know how you top that. You really can't, but you still, in 1985, we still had a strong grouping. We had the Crimson Twins, we had the Crimson Guards, we had the Cobra Eel, who is one of the most amazing action figures ever made. I don't know how many times I sat out there in a bucket of water and just had him deep dive. All the screws in mine are rusty, they're just gone. We had the Televiper, we had the Snow Serpent, and then we had Zartan's Dreadnoks, who are a big part of the cartoon. So it's a solid lineup of new figures, new villains. 1986, we had Serpentor. Nobody likes him. Nobody. I don't know.
Does anybody like him? I do. Okay,
Really?
So 1, 2, 3, 4. Like, so yeah.
Can you tell me why you like him? This I command.
I'm a little younger probably than many Joe collectors.
Don't brag.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Oh, come on.
You just turned the audience against
I'm a
you.
child of the 1987 movie, and so seeing him kind of rise to power in that spot turned me on to this type of design.
Right.
Yeah.
He was controversial, but he wasn't an Achilles heel of the franchise. He was controversial, but obviously he didn't kill the franchise. So that's why he's in this lineup. We've got Dr. Mindbender with him. Okay. We've got Zorana, the Bat's android trooper. We've got the new Viper, who replaces the Cobra Soldier. We've got the Motor Viper and the Night Raven pilot. It's a really great lineup for the most part. Yeah. But then in 1987, we have a guy with boxing gloves. We have a alligator wrangler. We have a magician. We have a Cylon warrior. We have a pirate of the Caribbean. We have Robo Cobra Commander. And we have a dude who thinks he's a bird. If I was running a terrorist organization worldwide and this guy showed up with a resume dressed like that, would I hire him? No, I would not.
Maybe if you were a giant snake guy, you would.
I mean, he is certainly insane enough to be part of my organization, but I don't think he would mix well with others. And, in a workplace environment, being able to work well with your teammates is important. We also got Crystal Ball, as I said. He's the magician guy. Crystal Ball is an interesting anomaly within the G.I. Joe mythology because most of the file cards of the toys were written by Larry Hama, who wrote the Marvel comic. And the Marvel comic, if you haven't read it, is really the true, in my opinion, the true mythology of G.I. Joe more so than the cartoon. It's an excellent comic book. It has nothing
Snake
really to
Eyes
do with the
agrees.
cartoon. Yeah. Larry Hama wrote the file cards for all the action figures. Except this one, and there's a reason. Not because Larry Hama looked at it and said, wow, that's stupid. He didn't do that.
He might have done that.
Hasbro's ear was attuned to Stephen King and his son. Apparently Stephen King and his son were friends with the guys at Hasbro. And his son wanted a magician amongst the bad guys. I guess his son was into magic tricks or something at the time. So they convinced Hasbro to make this Crystal Ball character, and then Stephen King and his son wrote the file card together. So this action figure was thrust upon us by Stephen King. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Owen.
Was there any connection with the Doctor Strange comics? Because he's got that same look with the white
I wouldn't
hair.
be surprised. I don't know for a fact, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Or just magicians look like that, I guess.
Right.
All we know is cocaine was involved.
Oh, yeah. It was the 80s.
I mean, boy howdy.
Yeah. We also got Cobra Law, which...
Okay, who likes Cobra Law? Cigarette smoking man and the young guy. Okay.
I like the movie.
the movie has its good points. It does. It also has some bad points, but it has its good points. Here's the deal with Cobra Law. I feel like this really is sci-fi, more in a joking way, but this really is G.I. Joe jumping over the fence at this point. It's like, okay, we're going to rewrite the origin of Cobra within the show. Like, you thought it was just Cobra Commander coming up with this terrorist organization. No, he works for supernatural beings that live in a land full of Audrey 2s. Like, it's this weird thing. And I don't want to talk about this too much because I feel like there's a character that summarizes how I feel about Cobra Law better than I ever could. So I'm just going to play this.
You make me sick.
Hooray!
But 1987 wasn't without its good G.I. Joes. We had some great G.I. Joes in the lineup. We had Law and Order with his awesome German Shepherd, and this character filled a slot in a military organization we hadn't had yet. He could protect or stand guard at the different facilities, like the headquarters.
I wish that the dog was like named Order and he was named Law. So it'd be like Law and Order.
I think that is the thing.
Is it?
The dog is Order.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm so smart.
So every time I see him now, though, when I look at him on my display case, when I first look at him, I'm tainted because I look at him and all I hear is "Don't don't." We also had Outback. Outback is a universally loved figure for good reason. He's got that I don't mean the survival shirt, but that's a little weird, him going into combat with survival. It's kind of like in Star Trek V where Kirk is on the bridge with "Go climb a rock" on his shirt. But what's cool about him is he is a true survivalist looking guy, and I think part of his appeal is that he looks like Chuck Norris. You also had Jinx. I like Jinx. I like that action figure. I like the female ninja aspect, even despite the fact that she's got nail polish on. I like the added mythology to the Arashikage ninja clan that was really popular in the comic book at the time. And you also had Falcon. He's a great looking action figure for G.I. Joe in that time period. He's very restrained. He actually looks like a Green Beret in his sculpting and design. And because Don Johnson, who voiced him in the movie, if you didn't know that. Don Johnson voiced him in the 1987 G.I. Joe movie. I also wanted to mention Chuckles. I'm not going to say that he's great. He's definitely based off the Miami Vice fad of that time period. He's got, the Hawaiian-looking shirt on, and But there's something interesting around Chuckles. There are questions that I want answered, so I wanted to walk you through a little bit of this. On the left here is a panel from issue 63 of the G.I. Joe Marvel comic. In this issue, Snake Eyes and Scarlet fake their own deaths in order to go AWOL to save Stalker and Snowjob and Quick Kick from an Eastern European gulag. Snake Eyes, when he wasn't on duty, would wear sunglasses with a mask. He had blonde hair, and he wore this Hawaiian print shirt. Well, around the time that he blows himself up, allegedly, Chuckles shows up, who is blonde-haired with a Hawaiian patterned shirt. Chuckles has no lines in the G.I. Joe movie and never speaks. Snake Eyes never speaks. Now, you might think I'm insane, but in the toy line, Chuckles is there the 2 years that Snake Eyes is not. Otherwise, Snake Eyes is in the entire toy line without a gap. The only time he's not sold on store shelves is when Chuckles was introduced. This gets even weirder to me because when I went in to see the movie Casino Royale, I noticed that somebody on the production team must have loved Chuckles because Daniel Craig is a muscular blonde guy wearing a Hawaiian print shirt and green cargo pants with a pistol, and the whole opening scene of the movie, I can't get plugged in because I'm thinking it's Chuckles the movie.
G.I. Joe movie we should have had.
So I gotta ask, are you actually Chuckles?
He's not gonna tell you.
Oh, okay, it's cool. It's cool. But we had some frustrating action figures in 1987 as well. We had a beautifully designed action figure in Gung Ho version 2 in full Marine dress uniform. But his play value is almost zero, because unless he's handing out medals on the deck of the Flag, there's really nothing you can do with him. He can't go into combat. His sword, which you see in the artwork, is even sheathed in the accessory. It just hangs off his side. He's like the imperial dignitary of the G.I. Joe line. Like, there's just nothing you can do with him. Psych Out is also ridiculous with all those radar dishes and antennas coming out of his appendages. He's supposed to be a psychological warfare expert, but all I see when I look at him is Gazoo. And then you have Crazy Legs, which the name alone, just like, wow, they weren't even thinking at Hasbro that day. But he's a paratrooper in a bright red outfit, which means his real code name should be Target. And so that does him no favors. Then you have Fast Draw. Now, as a kid, I went after Fast Draw. I was like, oh my God, the file card says he's from Tennessee. I'm from Tennessee. That's so cool. He's got like a flip down mask like the Silverhawks, and he's got that breathing tube, and he's got the missiles. But as an adult, when you really break him down, he's a guy with 2 missiles going into combat, and that's it. And after he fires those 2 missiles, he's spent. Like, what do you do with him? It's just not a very practical design. And then you've got Sneak Peek, which I know there's this whole cult of Sneak Peek. The guys on the G.I. Joe Berg podcast, they talk about him. They love him. Of course, they also love Scoop. So I guess they just love guys with lenses. But the thing about him, look how big that periscope is. I know it's supposed to be based off a real piece of old military hardware, but it's no fun with it. Like, everybody else in your G.I. Joe team is like heading into the objective, and Sneak Peek is like, wait up, guys, wait up, I gotta carry this thing. To add insult to injury, Sneak Peek's name is Owen King. they named him after Stephen King's son, who also gave us Crystal Ball.
Thanks
So,
again, Owen.
double whammy.
It's like he sent in the file card
Yeah.
with his name on it, and then they just put it on the actual file.
Right. And the other worst figure in the 1987 lineup is Falcon, because Don Johnson. We also had some really bad vehicles. We had the Cobra Pogo Ballistic Battle Ball. Say that 4 times fast. If you weren't turned into Jello riding around in this thing, here's the amusing thing about this. If you look in the lower panel, you'll see the Cobra Battle Ball's appearance in the comic book. Larry Hama was very often told by Hasbro, please get these toys in the comics so that we can promote them and sell them. How do you sell this realistically? Larry Hama was a military veteran. He's probably looking at this going, oh my God. So what he did was, he put it in the beginning of the issue. By the end of the issue, Cobra Commander, or Robo Cobra Commander, gets out of it and he says, this thing is not ready for actual field use. He said, it needs to go back into research and development. You never see it again. So he used it one time and then shelved it, which I thought was brilliant. You also have the Buzz Bore. It's a circular saw blade with a cockpit. And
General Grievous would have loved it.
General Grievous would have loved this vehicle. I just don't know what the practical application of this is besides digging ditches. I'm not sure. What's that?
It is?
That's true. It is a sideways Roton, the Roton from Masters of the Universe.
Watch the Roton's blade go swoosh.
And then you have the Mamba, which after the Night Raven, how do you follow that with anything? I call this the cloud car of Cobra vehicles. It's got 3 cockpits, 2 of which are supposed to be drones. If that aircraft is ever encountered by a G.I. Joe vehicle, those 2 guys in the drones are either going to have to drop out immediately or be, sky pizza, because they're just sitting ducks. And then you got this counter rotor system on it, which constantly broke if you had the toy, because the actual pins in it weren't strong enough and they would eventually wear out. It was a mess. And you also have the Mobile Command Center, which G.I. Joe apparently bought from the Jawas. It's a cool fish tackle box design, and it looks really neat. It's a very cool looking toy. It just doesn't look realistic for a military vehicle. But there are people out there in the toy collecting community that have bought them in not so perfect condition, and they've customized them to be sand crawlers, and it's amazing. They look really great. And this really is, it's epic in its scale. It's the flag of 1987, but it also cements the fact that G.I. Joe is never going back. It really is the toy that says G.I. Joe has used up all of its resources on Earth and all of its good stories on Earth. We are now going into space to tell the rest of this saga. I always saw G.I. Joe as a military toy, first and foremost. So making that leap into NASA is a little strange, being space guys, because Cobra didn't have anything to combat this. Okay, they go up into space and they orbit around and they, put up cable satellites, and I don't know what they do. In addition to the Defiant space vehicle, you also had the Cobras driving howitzers called Maggots, because apparently they'd run out of reptile names to give all their vehicles. You had Sergeant Slaughter with his Marauders. He had his own private group of guys that worked outside the confines of G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe worked outside the confines of the military itself. I don't know how many levels of Kevin Bacon we can go down with this. But it just feels like Hasbro was less and less interested in the core idea of G.I. Joe and more interested in starting to entertain their own tangents, using G.I. Joe as a brand name to sell these new ideas. And they got really obsessed with forces and groups. I wanted to run you through some of these between 1987 and 1994 because it gets really ridiculous. It starts with Battle Force 2000, which nobody likes. Even back then, nobody liked it. Nobody wanted it. Let's look at Avalanche, for example. Avalanche is wearing Buck Rogers' helmet. Buck Rogers' helmet, not from the 70s show even, but from the 1930s with the big wing on the top. And he's got a ray gun. Is this G.I. Joe? I don't think so. And then if you look at the rest of the guys' names, you've got Blaster, Blocker, Dodger, Knockdown, Maverick. I want to rename these guys the Football Force 2000 and just have the fridge lead them. I mean, that would have been a better application for them. And then you've got the vehicles from Battle Force 2000, which by all accounts are junk. I mean, they were really subpar quality from the rest of the stuff Hasbro was making in the line. The Vector Jet, for example, which has this removable battle pod on the back. The weird thing about this is that this vehicle looks scarily like a 1983 Gay Toys Laser Force jet. And yes, that's the name of the company, was Gay Toys. I wasn't making a joke. But look at that toy. That toy was a lower price point toy that was usually sold in like pharmacies or discount stores. But the Hasbro one on the top left looks almost just like it, and it's probably being sold for 3 or 4 times the price. The Battle Force 2000 also started the Build-A-Figure idea. For those of you that don't know what that is, the Build-A-Figure concept is you buy an action figure now and it comes with a piece of another figure. So if you buy all the figures in the line, you can build the last figure with all the parts that you got from your purchases. They started this by thinking, well, we'll have all the kids buy all the vehicles in the line and then they can build the playset called the Future Fortress. Not many parents bought into this. I wanted to show you this photograph just to show you how starkly G.I. Joe had changed in just 4 years. This is the 1983 catalog poster on the top left. While it still has Scarlet and Snake Eyes and the vehicles aren't completely authentic to the military, it's still a gritty Cold War post-Vietnam feel. And then you have the 1987 poster, which has the space shuttle, fast draw, the Pogo Battle Ballistic Ball, whatever you want to call it, on it. And it even gives prominent mention to Crocmaster in the lower left. It's like, watch out, G.I. Joe, I'm going to get you with my alligator farm. So these are some of the groups. This is the aforementioned Iron Grenadiers. That's the second version of Destro who led it. He was actually a pretty cool looking action figure with the gold face and everything. The Iron Grenadier is actually a very cool looking figure, but it's still a subgroup. It's the beginning of these subgroups. And then you had Python Patrol, Sky Patrol, Sergeant Slaughter's Marauders. You had the Eco Warriors. I want you to take note of this. Deep Six comes with a dolphin friend. An entire dolphin. You had the Air Commandos. You had the Star Brigade. That was like, this was their attempt at Star Wars. And yes, they fought aliens with names like Lobotomax. This is still branded as G.I. Joe, okay? Then you had the Mega Marines fighting the Mega Monsters. You also had Dino Hunters, which that is just ripping off the popularity of Jurassic Park at the time in the early 90s. You also had the Battle Corps, you had Night Force, you had Ninja Force, and you had Tiger Force. Tiger Force, I wanted to end on this one. It's not the last one, but it's the most popular one. And that's why I wanted to end this round of stuff on this. I know it's popular, and part of the reason that it was popular when we were kids is because some of us weren't old enough back at the beginning of the run to get some of the earliest vehicles. Tiger Force allowed us to do that by re-releasing those molds. But how many people in the military are going to paint their vehicles like a tiger before they go into battle? Again, these are all targets. So I wanted to share with you the top 10 signs of the Joe-pocalypse after 1987. Just thought we'd run through this a little bit. You had an armor bot, and it was motorized, and G.I. Joe, I guess, started to have mecha fights with other exosuits. It's kind of like robot jocks. Not saying that's not cool. Some people love robot jocks. You also had the Ninja Raider pile driver, which, if the name isn't obscene enough, it is a mechanical tornado. You had the septic tank. I just want to say that one more time. You had the septic tank. No, it's, if you look closely,
It's a Eco Warriors. I don't know if that's like some sort of chemical warfare, or I don't know.
Yeah, if you look closely at it, it's the original Cobra Hiss tank with a lot of unsightly garbage on it. And then they called it the septic tank. So it's literally a pile of poo. Yeah, the Cobra Law team, I'm sorry, they rank on this list because they really, I mean, look at Globulus on the far right. Look at that.
It's just
No.
wrong.
No.
Nope.
No! You had Budo from the line. Now, some people say, well, they had ninjas in the line, so come on, you have Budo. Okay, fine. But where did they find a full-on feudal samurai with all the feudal armor and everything to work for G.I. Joe? I had this figure. He was pretty cool. The problem with him is that imagine his first day at work, and he's introduced to Storm Shadow. And he's like, hey, this is Storm Shadow, you'll be working together. And the samurai's like, oh, hell no, right? Because these guys didn't like each other in history. Samurai didn't like ninjas. Ninjas didn't like samurai. You had the Super Trooper. He was their answer to Captain America. Not Super Soldier, Super Trooper, but he still had his awesome big shield. He was a mail-away figure. Had to be chrome. Everything cool in the 80s was chrome. You had Alley Viper. The reason I bring him up, I know there are fans of this figure, but this is clearly Cobra's HR group saying to their soldiers, just wear whatever you want.
It's camouflage for the 90s.
Yeah. You had the fourth version of Snake Eyes, which is just...
You're
exactly.
killing Snake Eyes over here.
I know,
Like,
because he's wearing the good costume.
I know.
It's just awful. I mean, Snake Eyes would never go into combat with red goggles, blue vest, blue boots, and silver accents. He just wouldn't do it. This is Desert Scorpion. Desert Scorpion has a pet, like most Joes, but his pet was a huge mutant scorpion, and even Crocmaster had a leash around his alligator. You can't put a leash around a scorpion, and they don't tame well. And then finally, I wanted to give you Duke version 3. I know you're probably like, oh, this seems a little anticlimactic, but look at the card art very carefully. Duke is straddling a huge cannon that he's firing off while he's riding it. It's really awkward. Like, this painting should never have passed quality control at Hasbro. They should have said, you know what? We need to go back to R&D on this. And then finally, I wanted to give you a bonus. I know we said 10, but there is a zenith to this. In 1994, the last year of G.I. Joe, you had a character who was codenamed Ice Cream Soldier. At that point, they have run out of ideas, epically. And this was a stake in the heart of the vampire that was once known as a real American hero, the toy line. Yeah, Ice Cream Soldier's file card states that the last thing you would expect from G.I. Joe's fiercest flamethrower commando is for him to be called Ice Cream Soldier. Try never expect, because we already had 100 never expects by this point.
I think the one thing, I don't want to be a downer here, but as a mom that was dealing with kids who were collecting this stuff, one of the big problems is, whether you're talking about one of the target groups or whatever, is that there was always that one figure that they would never release. And you parents were going everywhere trying to find that one figure. And they constantly did that.
Oh.
And it was a pain.
And there was no internet.
So
you
didn't
just
have
had
internet, we didn't have, so, and they intentionally did that, and we were, as parents, we were led to believe that it was because Star Wars had done that, and they were hopping off of that. But I can't tell you how many places we went looking for Snake Eyes. I just was sick to death of looking for Snake Eyes. So, yeah.
Snake Eyes couldn't find a Snake Eyes.
I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
you're popular. What can I say?
This young lady right here is a professional toy hunter. I know that because I was the one that wanted Snake Eyes, and she was my mom. And I have to tell you something personal before we end this. I know we're about to get out of here, but figure it's a good way to end the presentation. Figures, yeah. Pun.
Yeah.
She was frustrated, and that frustration comes out, you know why? Because she never gave up and found them all. Oh. She found every single one. She found... And I'm proud to say I still have them, the ones that she got me. I never got rid of them. I've still got them. So, anyway.
They're on display.
So if you're looking for a real American hero, look to your parents that bought these for you, because they were, they were the ones.
And knowing is half.
Knowing is half the battle. So can we
Well
get
said, Scarlett.
can we get a spirited G.I. Joe? 1, 2, 3. G.I. Joe! Happy Dragon Con, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.